My name is Evelyn Carter, and on the morning of my wedding day I expected nerves, maybe tears of joy, perhaps even a few words of encouragement from my family. What I did not expect was the message that appeared on my phone just as I was preparing to put on my uniform. It was from my father. "Don't wear that ridiculous outfit today. You'll embarrass the family. A bride should look beautiful, not like a soldier playing dress-up." The words cut deeper than any wound I had taken in battle. My hands trembled as I read them again and again, as though perhaps I had misunderstood. But no, his contempt was crystal clear. He wasn't proud that I had earned the right to wear the white ceremonial uniform, a symbol of years of grueling training, sacrifice, and discipline. To him it was nothing more than a costume, something shameful. I should not have been surprised. This was the man who had dismissed my medals as trinkets, who never once asked about the scars I carried back from the battlefield, who measured worth only in promotions, apartments, and weddings. Yet still, foolishly, I had hoped that today, of all days, would be different. The message was short, almost casual, as if he were commenting on the weather. But it carried the weight of decades of disapproval. It was not just about a dress or a uniform. It was a reminder that in his eyes, I had never been enough. I put the phone down and looked at my reflection in the mirror. The uniform hung nearby, pristine and waiting. My father's words echoed in my mind, but beneath the sting rose something stronger: defiance. If this was to be the day I pledged my life to another, it would also be the day I stopped apologizing for who I was. His insult wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my stand. The memory of that Thanksgiving dinner still lingered in Evelyn's mind like a bruise that never fully faded. The table had been set with polished silver and crystal glasses, the kind of show her parents loved to put on for friends and family. Laughter and chatter filled the dining room, yet Evelyn sat quietly, waiting for the right moment to share her news. When the conversation paused, she finally spoke, her voice calm but full of pride. "I was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal last week," she said, her eyes brightening as she remembered the ceremony. For a moment she thought her family might finally recognize her. Her father didn't even look up from carving the turkey. "A medal," he scoffed. "That's just a little pin. Nothing compared to real achievements." The words hit harder than she expected. Around the table, forks clinked and glasses shifted, but no one spoke in her defense. Her moment of honor had been reduced to a trivial trinket in a single breath. Benjamin, her older brother, seized the silence as an opening. Leaning back in his chair with smug satisfaction, he announced, "I got promoted to senior executive last month. And Mom and Dad bought me a new apartment downtown. It's got a view of the city skyline." The room erupted in applause and admiration. Their parents' faces lit up with pride, voices overlapping with congratulations. Evelyn sat there, her medal unmentioned, her service unseen, as though she had never spoken at all. Her mother passed Benjamin another helping of mashed potatoes, beaming as if the world revolved around him. Evelyn lowered her gaze to her plate, pushing food she no longer tasted. That night, long after the dishes were cleared and the guest had gone home, the words, "just a little pin," echoed in her ears. She had risked her life for that medal, bled, fought, and endured. Yet in her father's house, it was worth less than a new apartment. It was in moments like these that Evelyn realized her family didn't merely misunderstand her. They refused to see her. The first time Evelyn returned home from deployment, the airport smelled of coffee and jet fuel. Her duffel bag felt heavier than it should, not just from the gear inside but from the ache in her shoulder where shrapnel had torn through weeks before. She walked slowly, her body stiff with pain, yet her heart beat faster with anticipation. Maybe this time, she thought, her father would look at her with pride. Richard Carter was waiting at the curb, arms crossed, his expensive car gleaming behind him. Evelyn forced a smile as she approached. "Hi, Dad." He gave her a quick once-over, eyes skimming past the uniform, the bandaged arm, the exhaustion on her face. "So," he said flatly, "when are you going to settle down? Have you thought about marriage? A career that doesn't keep you running off to war zones?" "No, how are you? No, are you safe?" Not even a word about the wound that still burned beneath her sleeve. Evelyn's smile faltered. She opened her mouth to tell him about the missions, the nights spent under fire, the comrades she had lost, but the words caught in her throat. What was the point? His mind was already made up. To him, her service wasn't sacrifice. It was a delay. An inconvenience. Later that evening, Benjamin came over, loud and animated, recounting his latest business ventures. Their father leaned forward, hanging on every word, pride radiating from his face. Evelyn sat quietly on the couch, her arm throbbing, her heart hollow. The medals tucked in her bag upstairs meant nothing here. Her scars were invisible not because they couldn't be seen but because no one cared to look. That night, lying awake in her childhood bedroom, Evelyn realized that home no longer felt like home. She had faced enemies across oceans and survived, but the cold dismissal in her father's voice was a wound far harder to heal. The night before her wedding, the city stretched out beneath the window of Evelyn's hotel suite, lights flickering like constellations scattered across the earth. Yet despite the glittering skyline, her thoughts were heavy, pulled back to every moment she had been made to feel small. Her father's text still lingered on her phone. "Don't embarrass the family." Her mind replayed the Thanksgiving table where her medal had been dismissed, the airport reunion where her wound had been ignored. Each memory layered on top of the other, a weight pressing against her chest. Ryan, her fiancé, sat quietly on the edge of the bed watching her pace. He knew the look in her eyes, the one she carried when she spoke about her father. "Talk to me," he said gently. Evelyn stopped, fists clenched at her sides. "I've fought battles halfway across the world, Ryan. I've buried friends who gave everything. And yet tomorrow when I walk down that aisle, my father will still see me as a disappointment." Her voice cracked, but there was no weakness in it, only truth. Ryan rose and took her hands, steady and warm. "Then let tomorrow be different," he said. "Not for him, for you." Evelyn looked at him, her breath unsteady. For months she had been planning something quietly, carefully. A gesture not of revenge but of recognition. She hadn't told her family, hadn't told most of her friends. Only Ryan knew. "Tomorrow won't just be a wedding," she whispered. "It will be the day they finally see who I am. I won't let them erase me anymore." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with resolve. Evelyn stood a little taller, her shoulders straight, her jaw firm. The doubt that had haunted her for years began to loosen its grip. She would not walk into that chapel as the invisible daughter, the one who was always dismissed. She would walk in as Evelyn Carter, a soldier, a leader, a woman who had earned her place in the world. And this time they would have no choice but to see her. The morning of the wedding broke with a restless silence. Evelyn stood before the mirror, her uniform pressed and immaculate beneath the gown she would later wear. She had made a choice most brides would never dare, to honor both halves of her life, soldier and woman, without apology. By midday the chapel swelled with voices. Two distinct groups filled the pews, their difference striking even to the untrained eye. On one side sat her family and their circle, polished, affluent faces painted with the effortless grace of old money. They whispered behind manicured hands, eyes flitting toward Evelyn with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. For them, this wedding was another social performance, an occasion to be measured in appearances. On the other side sat her brothers and sisters in uniform. They filled the room not with whispers but with presence, scarred faces, strong postures, eyes that carried stories of battlefields far from home. Their medals caught the light as if refusing to be ignored. They spoke in low, steady tones, laughter erupting in brief bursts that carried genuine warmth. The contrast was almost theatrical. Silk dresses against fatigues, diamond cufflinks against service stripes. It was as though two different worlds had been forced into the same frame, waiting to see which one would dominate. Evelyn entered the room and the atmosphere shifted. Her family's gazes sharpened, measuring, critical. But from the other side came something far stronger: respect. The soldiers rose as one, a silent acknowledgement that needed no explanation. Her father stiffened, his jaw set. Her mother smiled thinly as though trying to cover the unease. To them, this was meant to be Evelyn's moment of assimilation, proof she could finally fall in line with their expectations. But Evelyn knew better. She felt Ryan's hand brush against hers, grounding her. His eyes carried the message she needed. You don't have to choose between their world and yours. Still, the tension hummed like a live wire. Evelyn could sense the storm gathering, the clash of values, of loyalties, of truths long buried. For too long she had been pulled between these two worlds. Today they would finally collide. The chapel doors creaked open and all conversation died into a hush. Evelyn stood framed in the doorway, her uniform gleaming beneath the filtered light. No lace, no silk, no veil. Instead, the sharp lines of military white defined her silhouette, every button polished until it caught the glow of the chandeliers. A ripple moved through the crowd. Some gasped, some exchanged whispers, but one voice carried above the others. Richard Carter, her father. Ridiculous, he muttered, loud enough for nearby Rose to hear. She couldn't even wear a proper gown. Always has to make a spectacle of herself. The words landed like shards of glass, yet Evelyn kept her head high. Each step echoed against the marble, steady and deliberate, as though the chapel itself were her parade ground. She had promised herself she would not flinch, not today. From the family's side, her brother Benjamin leaned toward his father, a crooked grin on his lips. Looks like a military convention, not a wedding. Their quiet laughter sliced through the silence, sharp and bitter. But then, movement. At the far end of the aisle, two uniformed officers stepped forward. Behind them another pair followed. The formation spread, boots striking the floor in perfect rhythm. The honor guard had arrived. The air shifted instantly. Their swords gleamed as they raised them in practiced precision, crossing steel above the aisle in a gleaming archway. The hushed crowd could only stare, their earlier whispers strangled into silence. Evelyn walked beneath the arch, her chin lifted, every inch the soldier and the bride she had chosen to be. The soldiers' movements were crisp, reverent, undeniable. Each snap of their boots against the stone floor was a declaration. This woman is one of us. She's worthy. The contrast was unbearable for her father. His smirk faltered. His eyes darted around the chapel, searching for someone who might share his disdain. But none did. Even the guests from his world sat straighter now, drawn into the gravity of the moment. At the altar, Ryan waited, his face unshaken by the spectacle, his pride barely contained. He knew this was no ordinary entrance. This was Evelyn's truth unveiled, her defiance wrapped in honor. The ceremony had not even begun, yet already the balance of power in the room had shifted. And Evelyn knew, it was only the beginning. The vows were moments away when the atmosphere in the chapel shifted again. A sudden stillness fell, sharper than before, as the double doors at the back swung open. From the entrance, a voice boomed with the crisp authority of command. "Admiral on deck." The words cracked like thunder through the room. In an instant, every military guest rose to their feet. Chairs scraped back, metals clinked, and the rustle of uniforms moved like a wave through the chapel. 150 officers, sailors, and Navy SEALs stood in unison, their posture rigid, their eyes fixed forward. Gasps rippled across the civilian side. Mothers clutched pearls, young cousins froze mid-whisper, and even Benjamin's smirk died on his lips. He had mocked Evelyn's convention, but now he sat in the middle of something he could neither laugh at nor ignore. At the center aisle, Evelyn felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders, not as a burden but as armor. Her father's mocking voice, his cruel words about her costume, all dissolved under the thunderous silence of respect that now enveloped her. The Admiral stepped into view, his uniform a tapestry of rank and achievement. But instead of taking the spotlight, he turned sharply toward Evelyn, raising his hand in a crisp salute. As though commanded by one breath, the entire formation followed. A sea of hands lifted to brows, the gesture sharp, synchronized, unshakable. The chapel shook with silence. Not a cough, not a whisper dared break the weight of the salute. It was respect made visible, carved into every line of their posture. Evelyn's father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The color drained from his face, his authority crumbling in the presence of something greater than his disdain. Sarah, Evelyn's mother, covered her mouth with trembling fingers, tears slipping free as she stared at the daughter she had underestimated for so long. Benjamin's eyes darted helplessly between the admiral, the officers, and Evelyn herself. For once he had nothing clever to say. Evelyn inhaled, slow and steady, her pulse thrumming in rhythm with the stillness. She did not salute back. This was not her parade ground. Instead, she let the silence speak for her. Every slight, every insult, every dismissal from her family had led to this, the undeniable proof of who she was. The admiral's voice finally broke the silence, low but commanding. Today we honor not just a marriage, but a woman who has given more to her country than many could ever comprehend. Lieutenant Carter, this salute is yours. And in that instant the wedding was no longer a ceremony of vows. It became Evelyn's vindication. When the last echo of the admiral's words faded, the chapel felt like it was suspended outside of time. The line of officers still held their salute, their eyes steady, their discipline absolute. It was as though the world had shifted its axis, placing Evelyn firmly at the center. And on the front pew her family's faces told the story she had waited her entire life to see. Richard Carter, her father, sat stiff, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the pew. The flush of arrogance that had always colored his face was gone, replaced by a pale shade of disbelief. His mouth opened, then closed as though he wanted to scoff but couldn't summon the words. His authority, once so unshakable at the dinner table, now looked small against the ocean of salutes directed at his daughter. Next to him, Sarah's reaction was different. Her eyes glistened and she pressed a trembling hand to her lips. For years she had remained silent in the face of Richard's dismissals, choosing peace over defense. But now, seeing Evelyn honored in a way no parent could deny, her composure cracked. A tear slipped free, then another, her shoulders quivering as if decades of quiet pride had finally been given permission to surface. Benjamin sat further down, leaning back as if to distance himself from the spotlight. His smirk, the same smirk he wore when mocking her medals, when boasting of his job and his apartment, was gone. In its place was something uglier. Unease, maybe even fear. His eyes darted to the rows of officers, to the admiral, then back to Evelyn. He had always been the golden son, basking in their father's approval. But in this moment, surrounded by unshakable respect for the sister he had belittled, Benjamin looked small, his confidence hollow. Even Evelyn's cousins, who once laughed along with Benjamin's teasing, were frozen in awe. One young cousin tugged at his mother's sleeve, whispering, "Why are they saluting her?" The answer hung heavy in the silence. Because she had earned it in ways no story at Thanksgiving, no apartment, no job promotion could ever match. Evelyn stood tall at the aisle, her gaze steady. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Every uniformed salute, every stunned silence from her family was louder than any speech she could have prepared. For the first time in her life she was not invisible. Her father's eyes finally met hers, and for a fleeting second, the mask of superiority broke. Evelyn saw it. Fear, regret, the dawning realization that he could no longer deny who she was. But Richard, proud and stubborn, looked away just as quickly, his jaw tight. Sarah did not look away. Through her tears she gave Evelyn the faintest nod, a mother's silent acknowledgement long overdue. Benjamin remained frozen, his hand clenched into a fist, his pride battling the humiliation of being overshadowed. Then Evelyn, she simply walked forward, past their disbelief, past their silence, toward the altar. With every step, the honor guard's salute followed her like a shield, as though the entire weight of the Navy itself carried her forward. For once, the power dynamic in the Carter family had shifted completely. Evelyn was no longer the underestimated daughter, the sister to be mocked, the child to be dismissed. She was Lieutenant Evelyn Carter, and no one in that room could deny it. The reception hall was alive with energy, the kind that vibrated with genuine admiration. The chandeliers spilled golden light over tables draped in navy and white, while a string quartet played softly in the corner. But the true brilliance of the evening wasn't in the decor. It was in the people who filled the room. Evelyn stood at the center, her crisp white uniform gleaming, her medals catching the light. She wasn't alone. Senators, decorated officers, and fellow soldiers moved toward her like planets orbiting a sun. Each handshake was firm, each word sincere. "Lieutenant Carter, it's an honor to be here tonight," one admiral said, raising his glass. "You've set a standard for us all," a fellow SEAL added, his voice carrying the weight of respect. Even a senator leaned in, his tone hushed with admiration. "America needs more leaders like you." The hall echoed with toasts, laughter, and stories of battles fought and victories won. Evelyn's comrades spoke of her courage under fire, of the nights she stood watch while others slept, of the moments she refused to quit when others had broken. Each tale added another brick to the monument of respect being built around her. And then, on the edges of the room, her family lingered. Richard stood with a glass untouched in his hand, the stem trembling slightly between his fingers. No one approached him. No one offered him conversation or deference. He had always been the loudest voice in any room, but here he was silent and invisible. Sarah hovered beside him, her eyes red from earlier tears. She looked at Evelyn across the room, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak, to cross the distance, to say what had been left unsaid for decades. But she didn't move. Perhaps she knew that her presence, tethered still to Richard's shadow, would only diminish Evelyn's moment. Benjamin fared worse. He tried to insert himself into conversations, boasting of his career and his apartment in the city, but the words fell flat. No one cared. No one asked questions. His voice, so used to commanding attention in family gatherings, was drowned out by the weight of Evelyn's achievements. Eventually he retreated to the back wall, sulking, his jaw tight with resentment. The sharpest contrast came when a group of Evelyn's SEAL comrades began to sing, a rough, unpolished Navy hymn, their voices filled with camaraderie. The entire room clapped along, their cheer directed at Evelyn. In that thunderous applause, Richard and Benjamin shrank even further into irrelevance. Evelyn noticed them, of course. She always noticed. But for the first time in her life, their absence from her circle did not wound her. Instead, she felt lighter, untethered. Surrounded by those who truly saw her, she no longer needed the approval that had been withheld all her life. She raised her glass when the crowd called her name, her voice steady and strong. "To those who serve and to those who honor sacrifice, may we always remember where true loyalty lies." The hall erupted in cheers. At the edge of the room, Richard, Sarah, and Benjamin exchanged a look heavy with discomfort. No one noticed when they quietly slipped out, their departure overshadowed by another round of applause for Evelyn. For once, their leaving was not a wound. It was a release. And Evelyn, radiant and unshaken, stood tall in the heart of the celebration, surrounded by respect, loyalty, and the family she had chosen for herself. Years had passed since that unforgettable day. Evelyn Carter now stood at the pinnacle of her career, her uniform adorned with medals, commendations, and symbols of service that spanned decades. Yet it wasn't the accolades that mattered most. It was the journey she had taken to claim the respect she had long been denied. Sitting in her office, overlooking the city, Evelyn reflected on the path that had brought her here. She remembered the morning insult from her father, the Thanksgiving dismissal, the cold indifference upon her return from the battlefield. Each moment had cut deep, shaping her determination to be seen, to be acknowledged, and to define her own worth. She had built more than a career. She had built a life rooted in choice. She had chosen loyalty, courage, and honor over the shallow validation of a family that had never truly recognized her. She had chosen friends and mentors who celebrated her sacrifices. And she had chosen love that respected and supported her, rather than the hollow promises of those too blinded by their own expectations to see her value. Evelyn's eyes fell on a photo on her desk. The reception hall filled with cheering officers, the proud glances of her colleagues, and the empty spaces where her family had stood. She smiled, not with bitterness but with quiet satisfaction. They had refused to see her then, but she had forged her own recognition. She had found her peace. Even love had been chosen wisely. Ryan, the man who had stood by her side during her wedding, had grown with her. He had never demanded that she conform to the narrow definition of success her family had imposed. Together they had built a partnership based on mutual respect and understanding, a reflection of the life Evelyn had always deserved. And though her parents and brother remained distant, Evelyn no longer needed their approval. She had learned that respect could not be inherited or forced. It had to be earned, and she had earned it every step of the way. Looking out over the horizon, Evelyn whispered to herself, "True family isn't always born, it's chosen. True respect isn't given, it's claimed." She had claimed both. And in doing so she had finally found the peace, recognition and fulfillment that had eluded her for so long. The world saw her now, not as a daughter to please, but as a woman who had carved her own legacy, one defined by courage, honor and self-worth. Evelyn Carter, once overlooked and underestimated, had become unstoppable. And in the quiet moments she allowed herself to feel proud, not for anyone else but for herself. The journey had been long. The battle had been hard. But the final truth was hers. She had chosen her life and she had lived it fully, fearlessly and on her own terms.